Oh my God.
What's going on?
I can't, am I on? I'm such a big fan. I can't believe I'm on. How you doing?
You're not that big of a fan.
I am, Graham. I'm your biggest fan. You know that letter you got with the 32 toenail clippings in it? That was from me.
Oh, that's good. Was it weird
from
at
me.
all? The Polaroid photos of various things in your body. That was not totally cool. That was great.
Yeah, that was on me. That was on me.
I very much appreciate my audience, as I'm sure you do, but you can always tell every once in a while somebody just shows up and it's like, you're the most amazing. And they show up on all the platforms, all the live chats. And I'm always like, I always just start my stopwatch. What is it? 3 months, 6 months before they lose their shit? What's it going to take? How long? When's the clock going to tick when they're just going to go bananas? And then the crazy single spaced all cap emails show up, and then you're like, oh boy, here we go.
Yeah. Or how long till they burn out? You know, if they're
right.
I'm a huge fan, and then you never hear from them again.
They're just gone. Like, I can't do this anymore. I didn't ask you to do any of this stuff. Like, you went nuts. You know?
They're like, I sent you 3 sweaters and I didn't get so much as a baseball cap back. And you're like, I don't know what kind of relationship you think we have.
I don't. Yeah. I just put food. I made you a casserole and I sent it in the mail, and then you didn't even eat it.
It was in a series of 14 envelopes. I couldn't fit it in the first envelope.
A casserole in a series of envelopes, and you didn't eat it. You didn't talk about it like that. That's nuts. You're just a horrible person. Like, you sent me food through the mail, right? You're a complete stranger, right? Like, that's odd. Like,
you're like I ate it, sure, but I didn't feel good afterwards. I'll be honest.
Of course I ate it. I'm a single guy living alone. I'm going to eat it. You put food in front of me, I'm going to eat it. But I'm not. It's not going to be that big of a deal. Like,
yeah. I ate it. You just don't get a thank you. I mean, Jesus.
It's weird that you said it, but I'm still going to eat it. I mean, I'm not insane. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Government Secrets with Lee Cap, episode 34. Crazy fan intro.
Approximately 31 episodes than we thought it would go. Pretty exciting.
Don't think we'll see 40. How was your move? How was the
Oh man, it was good. It was not bad, as you can see. New wall behind me.
So just kind of a different setup, or
Yeah, it's slightly bigger. The other apartment, the management company sucked, and those type of things.
God, it's like they don't let you set up a meth lab in your apartment anymore without a hassle. You know what I mean? It's
not even like a miniature easy bake version. easy bake meth.
I'd love to see some commercial with a bunch of kids. Easy bake meth, like hazmat suits.
Bunch of kids dressed like Breaking Bad.
Yeah. but the instead of the like blue stuff that Heisenberg made, it's like unicorns and rainbows. And
right. Holding up a tray of rainbow colored meth.
Oh God. Oh, easy bake oven meth with Lee Camp. Well, we've had an insane week as always.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah, we have. So what do we want to start with?
I'm sure I'm not the first to make this joke, but it just occurred to me this past week we saw Biden failing upwards, as the oligarchy tends to do. They fall upwards.
It was so okay. Guy tripped on the stairs. That's not new. Whatever, and that could happen to anybody at any age. But then he started to speed up. That's what was insane. I was like, why is he going faster?
Well, you just make the legs go faster. Then everything will work out after that.
And it's like, and then he keeps falling again.
I was wondering, because their big thing for him and all of his administration and everything is to make him not look old. You know, that's part of the reason that he's sprinting up those steps alone is like, no, we can't have AIDS with him. He's got to look like he can do it on his own. And I was wondering, like, how many steps would he have to fall down consecutively before they were like, okay, it's worse now to let him do it on his own. Send someone in to stop him from falling. Because he's hit 13 steps. And
why does any president, especially a guy this old, why are they like, yep, let's make him walk up that crazy long flight of stairs to get to an airplane? Like, we can't put the guy in a jetway. There's not a lift that raises him. Like, can there's something
because they know how old he would look if they put him on like a little elevator thing and he just stood there waving.
I mean, if I was president, I'm in good shape. I'd be like, do I have to run up? I already worked out today. Do I got to do more stairs? Like, I mean, I guess if I was president, I'd be like, you know what? I want a rope and I'm going to climb up there and get to the top. Yeah, USA.
They should totally give him just a rope with the knots in it. Oh my God. And you know what's interesting though? He would do better than Trump on the rope with the knots because Trump weighs, 260, 300 pounds, but thinks he's a spry young man.
Trump could get up there if you made every knot like a Wendy's hamburger. then he might be able to get to the top. But Biden,
or like a brown baby for him to strangle. If like each one he got up, he could kill another not white baby. I think then he'd make it.
Based on what's happening at the border, either one of them would do that.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Biden would probably want to imprison them more. But, yeah.
He would just like, let's imprison these knots. But put them in facilities, not cages. It sounds better when you have people in facilities.
Absolutely. Do they have banners above as you walk in that says work will set you free?
Oh, Jesus Christ. Wow.
I mean, seriously.
Right.
And but China is committing human rights violations.
Oh my God. I can't. Andrea Mitchell today, Jesus, she put something on. I got to read that. I'm sorry. This just makes me so irate because it's like, this is.
Yeah, she's the worst. She's the worst.
Andrea Mitchell put, the big difference between the United States and China at the end of the day is that China can't face criticism without jailing its critics or silencing them, and in some cases, even killing them.
Yeah.
Julian Assange, Andrea? Oh, that's right. You never mention him, or you think he's a criminal or whatever.
Julian Assange, Stephen Donziger, Mumia Abu-Jamal, Leonard Peltier. You want to just go down the list?
Yeah. I mean, any of them. Gary Webb. Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. He committed suicide when he shot himself in the head twice. I'm sorry. We shouldn't put him on the list.
Listen, once you get going shooting yourself in the head, you want to just see it through several shots,
Absolutely. The United States, built into our Constitution, faces our challenges, overcomes them, and works towards becoming a more perfect union. Oh, my God. Okay, where do we begin on how ridiculous this is? First of all, this and this is the corporate media. I'm sorry. What happened in Atlanta is awful, and hate crimes towards Asians have been on the rise since the coronavirus. But our government, and not just Trump, the Democrats now too, keep talking tough on China. That actually helps fuel.
It's not just but it's not just tough on China. It is full on propaganda bullshit against China. I'm not saying everything China does is perfect, but it's like, there is not a fucking genocide going on. And you're diluting the term genocide by claiming there is. I mean, you look into the garbage they're quoting as a genocide. It's one dude. It's this one maniac, an evangelical anti-Semite German named Adrian Zenz, who makes up numbers and says it's a genocide and says God has told him that he's on a pursuit to stop communism in China or something like that. He's fucking crazy. And you have everybody from these clowns to our politicians to Democrats, Republicans, Democracy Now, all quoting him as if you should ever listen to the word the idiot says.
Oh, and first of all, and everyone goes, well, China's done this and this bad. I'm always like, I'm sorry. Did they kill 85,000 children in Yemen? No. Are they bombing whatever we're at? How many? 5, 6, 7 countries? Who knows how many countries they're bombing right now?
Kill a million in Iraq.
Yeah. Did they kill 1 million in Iraq? Did they contaminate the water in Flint and 1,000 other cities? Did Chinese pipelines break in America? Was it Chinese soldiers that were shooting cold water at water protectors at Dakota?
Do they imprison over 2 million of their own citizens per capita? No. We have more prisoners and more prisoners per capita. And
I'm sorry, they're trying, the media, of course, the corporate media, which spews all this anti-China propaganda. They're trying to say that what happened in Atlanta is just the racism and white nationalism in our country, which we have plenty of. But I'm sorry, man, this constant spewing of China bad, that translates to let's just get Asians. I'm sorry, it does. And they can't pretend that it doesn't. Right. And that's what absolutely drives me insane is it's like, no, you assholes are helping push this shit by blaming everything on China, and China's bad. And Andrea Mitchell is pushing this. And it's like, she's not helping. Like, and I see these people like stop Asian hate, but by the way, China's awful. Like, come on. And we're going to get into it. I have a government secret we're going to get into, but the history of just Asian in general attitudes in this country has been going on for over 100 years. Hollywood has been doing it since its inception. So
yeah, we have a long, rich history of anti-Asian garbage in this country, and to act like that, this Asian hatred popped up yesterday because Trump said some racist things is a complete rewriting of history.
It's insane. It's just like, I'm sorry, was it Trump that did Japanese internment camps? No. He
was pretty young, but yeah, it was him.
Oh, and he came up with the term "gook" during the Vietnam War and put that in all these Vietnam movies. Come on, really? I don't want to hear it, man. Like, it's just like this.
And he also, even though he it wasn't in the military, he's also the one that obliterated a third of North Korea's population in the Korean War.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he didn't drop the bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But maybe we can pin it on him or blame China for that. I don't know. It's just insane. Yeah. It's insane to see this hypocrisy and people don't make the connections. It's unreal.
Yeah.
All right, buddy. 224 people watching? Hit the like button, ladies and gentlemen. Share this on your social media. If you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, positive reviews, download, all those clicky analytic things help.
Yeah. Well, since yours is, mine's not related to the anti-Asian hatred. So if yours is, let's go with that first.
All right. Government secret segment number 1. So I wanted to talk about going back to the history. Obviously, to show many things. One, what happened in Atlanta is awful. Trump didn't help that, his rhetoric and his saying the China virus, but this has been going on for well over 100 years. And as we just pointed out, both political parties have spewed this China crap recently. So even during the debates with Biden and Trump and all this other stuff. So I wanted to talk about what happened in the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. In the East, there was a lot of Irish and Mormons used to help build the eastern part. And in the West, it was Chinese. And they were completely mistreated by capitalists who were also, they took their capitalism and said, we're going to mistreat, we like mistreating workers, but if they're minorities, then we're going to really mistreat them. That's
right. It's even easier because you can tell the white workers like, oh, well, the Chinese workers are less than human. So they're below you.
So let's bring this up. Forgotten by society how Chinese migrants built the transcontinental railroad. So I want to go into this. They just celebrated the 150 year, when this was a couple years ago. From 1863 and 1869, roughly 15,000 to 20,000. I've researched several. It's in the neighborhood closer to 20,000. Chinese workers helped build the transcontinental railroad. They were paid less than American workers and lived in tents while white workers were given accommodation in train cars. So great system already. Chinese workers made up most of the workforce between roughly 700 miles of train tracks between Sacramento, California, and Utah during the 19th century. More than 2.5 million Chinese citizens left their country and were hired in 1864 after a labor shortage threatened the railroad's competition.
And, you know, maybe people kind of know this, but I imagine some aren't really thinking about it, that these railroads were going through just, you know, hundreds of miles of just nothing. So it's not like there was like towns every 4 feet or anything. So it was fucking brutal, man. I mean, imagine you're going through just like the Wild West wilderness and you're trying to lay down a flat railroad with nothing there.
Nothing. I mean, that's part of it. And this story goes into it. And I was doing some other research. I mean, like, so what you're talking about, they had to like dynamite through mountains.
Yeah.
They had to excavate stuff, and thousands were, like hundreds, if not thousands, were just died. They just like got killed. The thing collapsed, or the dynamite blew up wrong, or
right.
And they died, and we're just like, all right, we'll go get some more workers. You know, like
OSHA wasn't jumping in to make sure work conditions were all right. You know.
I know. And there weren't any real unions at the time, which is why when people are like, oh, we don't want unions, I'm like, unions are not perfect. They're only as good as their leadership. However,
they are the only way that workers have any power
at all. And without them, the management can just blow you up, or I don't know, make you work in an Amazon warehouse during a pandemic and not pay you anything extra. You know, just stuff like that.
Right.
So the Chinese workers, as the article indicates, paid less, were put in worse conditions, and because they were the majority of the workforce, were also put in like the most dangerous thing. So it wasn't so like, we got to go, you know, excavate that thing or blow that mountain up. It's like, well, the Chinese workers can go put the dynamite in there. Literally, it was like that. The white workers, we're going to let you sleep in boxcars, but these guys can go blow that up and potentially put them lives on the line. All workers, they had to face dangerous work conditions, accidental explosions, snow and rock avalanches, which killed hundreds of workers, not to mention frigid weather. So it's frigid weather. So again, they're going through the mountains of California, Nevada, and Utah in the winter, and they get to sleep in tents. Nice.
And I don't think they had like, you know, North Face gear either. I think
I don't know if there was an REI out there just yet. Maybe they had set it up, and I can't remember if they got those warmers that are electric or whatever. But I don't know that they had solar charging out there that they could use.
Yeah.
So all the workers on the railroad were listed as other, which is just shows you how the capitalists have always viewed labor. So it's like, the Irish and the Mormons were other, so they weren't as valuable. But even below that, the Chinese were less than the less than human other category.
Their group was called sub-other.
Sub-other. They were sub-other. Okay, cool. And so this is mainly talking about. This is from an exhibition celebrating this. But the railroad company provided root and board for white workers, but Chinese workers had to find their own meals. So
what the fuck? Like, yeah, you know, the 7-Eleven.
So again, all they got to do is go to an REI, or as you said, a 7-Eleven, and they're fine. I don't know what all the complaining's going on. So just
I mean, sure, they had to live off, week-old taquitos that roll around on the little roller pins, but still, it's
we call taquitos. Yes. And the taquitos of the late 1800s actually were pretty good.
Well, and the 7-Eleven out in the middle of the Rocky Mountains didn't have a lot of people coming through, so that taquito could sit there for weeks.
Weeks.
Yeah.
And sometimes the Slurpee machine wouldn't work. I mean, it was really challenging. And then good luck getting lottery tickets. Like they're just not going to make it up to that hill.
The lottery was, will I blow up today? Will I be blown up today?
That's the lottery. Like this is how sadistic these companies are. So we're going to hire workers that we instinctively out of the gate, we're going to treat like shit. But this group, we're going to treat even worse. So we're going to send you in to make yourself get blown up. You're going to have to deal with avalanches and snow and ice. And we don't even feed you. Like, gee, this, I don't know, sounds like slavery. Like, to me,
pretty damn close to slavery.
And so then they had to go in to, they had to find their own meals, which were often brought to them from local merchants. So then they had to go buy their own food. Man, what a deal. And they're also, this is talking about the thing. So their conditions were so horrible. And because the majority of the Chinese immigrants that came here were educated and they were organized, 3,000 of them went on strike in 1867 to demand equal wages as the white workers were paid double. So they already organized and knew how to do that. Mm-hmm. They were unsuccessful because they were out in the middle of nowhere. The railroad stopped them from getting food. That's how they ended the strike. They starved them out.
Yeah.
And you cannot tell me there wasn't racism with this, because it's like these are the robber barons who own the railroads were rich white guys who were like, okay, the Irish are less than, but the Chinese are even way less than, because at least the Irish are white. They're at least white less than. Yeah. And so this was fueled by racism, just like the way they took the land from the indigenous people, from the Native Americans. They said, oh, you're less than, you're not white. So we're going to just take it and do what we want. That's the other thing.
And it's easier to treat workers like shit when they're in a new land. They often don't speak the language. They often don't speak the language of many of the other workers, like you were saying, Irish and Italian and stuff. So they will kind of take whatever they can get because they don't even know. Like, it's not like they have a community they can go back to. It's a lot easier to kind of enslave or abuse workers that are just, because they can't get by with the language and everything else, they are looking to the bosses for basically any way to survive.
Yeah. And again, the language thing is not a small issue, because the Irish at least spoke English. So they eventually could assimilate into certain areas of government. Right. And mainly on the East Coast, there was a lot. The old stereotype was the Irish cops. Well, they got to be cops. They got to get into government. They got to get into city councils. They were able to kind of work their way up a little bit. 10 times harder for the Chinese, who completely different language. I mean, even like Italian or German, those languages are overlapping. But Mandarin Chinese and English are the two most opposite things you're going to find. Yeah. And so they took advantage of that. And gee, this might sound familiar when big American corporations have then, for the last 20, 30 years, been setting up factories in third world countries. It's sort of the reverse. They exploit labor because this is a poor country. So if we set up a factory there, we don't have to pay union wages, 25, 30 bucks an hour. We can pay these people $1 a day or $2 a week or whatever. Yeah. And what else are you going to do? If you don't like it, we'll set up the factory in another third world country. So then it was like, when I hear the capitalists go, things are better, capitalism has lifted millions of people out of poverty and blah, 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 not in the third world, and this has been happening. I mean, probably since the dawn of time, really, if you want to go back to the pyramids, that was built by slaves. But this is how this works.
I will say there are some arguments as to whether the pyramids were built by slaves. It was clearly aliens. No, but no, I've seen several things recently that it's not like they were, living high and mighty, but they weren't necessarily slaves building the pyramids. But anyway,
sure.
We can argue about that later.
Fine. Somebody that wasn't the aristocracy didn't build the pyramids. We can agree on that.
Yeah. Right. The pharaohs weren't lifting, they didn't have 20-ton blocks on their backs.
Yeah, I don't think the pharaohs were out in the hot sun working. Okay. By paying laborers low wage, they were able to skim. This is the other thing the capitalists are so great. There was the Union Pacific board members sitting on a business class train car from 1869. By paying laborers a low wage, they were able to skim millions from the construction and get rich. So it's so great when not only do you make somebody's life worse, you profit from it. I mean, that's really the 2-for-1 bonus of the horrific consequences of capitalism.
Well, yeah, it is such an immense level of greed because it's like, they probably got a contract to build this railroad, and the contract accounted for them to make money within the contract. But they realized, well, yeah, I could make some money, still not a bad amount if I pay workers right. But man, the amount of money I could make if I pay them almost nothing is astronomical. So it's like, yes, these people didn't just want to get rich; they wanted to get really rich.
Yeah, and again, the soullessness of the ruling elites. And so what if some of them die? As long as I make a profit, like, who cares? Like, this is unbelievable. Building railroads is often profitable, but operating them isn't necessarily. If you look at the history of railroads in the United States, to totally condemn the business is challenging because they took huge. Oh, no, I'm not going to listen to this guy fucking defend these capitalist fuckheads. But
yeah, classic Guardian. Let's tell you about how the Chinese were mistreated, but also about how the capitalist fuckheads were doing wonderful things.
Yeah, just to be fair, they put up some risk. Okay, really, Guardian? Were they going through avalanches, Guardian? No, they didn't. Did they tell me show me a photo of one of them putting one stick of dynamite to blow up something to put down railroad track? Oh, you don't have that. Interesting. Then let's talk about Chinese workers were not citizens, weren't allowed to become citizens. From the 1850s to 1882, they were tolerated in the U.S., but not accepted as peers. And then there was the Chinese Exclusion Act, which barred immigrants from coming on into U.S. unless you were a diplomat or business person. You're always welcome if you're affluent, then you're allowed to come in.
Right.
The Chinese Exclusion Act, which let's just click on this real quick, from 1882, was approved May 6, 1882, was the first significant law restricting immigrants into the United States. Specifically, I mean, it's called the Chinese Exclusion Act.
Yeah, they weren't as clever with their titles back then.
Yeah, well, I mean, now they would call it the Chinese Independence Freedom Act or something like right. Stars and Stripes, American Eagles for the Chinese Act. And even though it's like, you read it and it's like, oh, it's saying Chinese people are less than, but they get to put an American eagle on a flag or something.
Right.
So that's the history. So literally the Chinese Exclusion Act. So that, and people would say, yeah, but that's the Chinese, and this salon was, the people in Atlanta was Korean, but that's, if you go into racism and American racism, they're just like,
Well, yeah. I mean, if you go, it's not just, you're talking about the early railroads, but it keeps going throughout our history and the internment camps during World War II. The fact that we were even willing to drop 2 atomic bombs, as you and I covered, that didn't need to be dropped, largely was thanks to the immense amount of racism towards Asians that meant that they were kind of like less than human. So why not test out the bombs on them? They're not really people. I mean, it really does go through the amount of bombing that went on over North Korea. Like I said, it's like that level of just sheer fucking destruction largely wasn't done against like the Germans, and with the exception of maybe Dresden. It's just we treat, even in war, we treat Asians different than when we're at war with someone white.
I mean, I don't recall. I think there might have been some kind of internment camps for Germans in America on a very small scale and limited.
There was a small scale, but I did hear something about how much better they were treated than the Japanese internment camp.
Where Italians weren't put into internment camps. We were at war with Mussolini. I mean, how come they weren't put into a term? Why didn't we take their land? And largely, we discussed this during the atomic bombs of Japan episode that was, I don't know, maybe a month or so ago, but we talked about how a lot of the Japanese internment camps on the West Coast were designed for land grabs. It was like, let's snatch up we got to take their homes because they might be traitors. And it was just to take their land. And then
when they were released out of the camps after the war was over, they weren't given their houses and land back. It was just like, okay, you're free now, but you lost everything.
Good luck. And then, too, again, with the Chinese, we sort of reined in the racism towards them and Asians and towards the Chinese specifically during World War II, when we kind of needed them as allies to a certain degree. Right. And we painted them as allies, as we did Russia. Russia was our ally in World War II. And then, as Malcolm X pointed out, the minute that World War II was over, suddenly Russia and China are our enemies again. And look, it's going back to Andrea Mitchell's ridiculous quote. If China bought our weapons and gave us oil, then they could chop up an American journalist like the Saudis do. And the most they get is a stern talking to from Uncle Joe. I mean, it's in the history of this, as we discussed. So it goes from the Chinese Excursion Act in 1882. And then again, and this happened even in World War II propaganda of showing the sort of racist, like bucktooth, less than human. And then they did that in Vietnam. And they were, and if you watch even movies that I've, are even movies like Apocalypse Now or Deer Hunter or Full Metal Jacket, which have really strong anti-war messages in them, they still mostly depict the Vietnamese as just, they're never full characters. They're just like the pajama terrorists, or the women are only depicted as prostitutes or whatever. And we never meet them, talk to them. We never hear their point of view. And that's, again, to talk about how Hollywood has pushed this narrative since its inception. There's few movies that have ever been made that showed that humanized them.
Well, yeah, and I was trying to think, and I was like, well, I guess Good Morning Vietnam did kind of, it definitely had, Asian Vietnamese characters, and it humanizes them and you get to know them. But it also, at the same time, gives you basically a view on at least some American soldiers as really good people trying to do good over there. But, which I'm not saying there aren't good, my dad was in Vietnam. I'm not saying there aren't good people in Vietnam, but, that's not really the impression we should be left with as to what happened in Vietnam.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's like, and on, like the other thing too, you want to watch a good documentary called The Fog of War, an interview with William McNamara talking about how America just kind of slowly kept expanding into Vietnam. And this goes to the same racism. I'm just like that colonial, white colonial racism of Vietnamese, Chinese, whatever, it's all over there, and not realizing they're completely different cultures. William McNamara talked about he met his North Vietnamese counterpart years later, like 20 years later.
Yeah.
And they started, and he goes, and this is in William McNamara's words. He goes, it almost came to blows. He goes, because I was like, you guys were going to line up with the Chinese. We didn't want that. That's why we had to put a foothold in Vietnam. And the guy's like, have you read a history book? We hated the Chinese. Vietnam, the Chinese treated us as less than. I mean, like, what are you talking about? And it's like that, just rooted in racism. Oh, they're going to link up with the Chinese. They refuse to understand the culture, just like we do in the Middle East. Oh, those Muslims. Wait a minute. The Shiites, the Sunnis, the Kurds, completely different things.
Yeah.
And this is part of the history of and again, why what we did in Vietnam, we shouldn't have been there. Ho Chi Minh came to this country in the late 40s and read the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and read our history and assumed we would be on his side because they were a French colony, and they would like, oh, well, America's going to side with us because, and well, no, we're going to side with the French because you're Asian and we support big business and we're racist.
And we support white people.
And we support white people. And we support colonialism. As white people can do whatever they want. And that's like the history of this. So like what happened in Atlanta, these seeds were planted 150 years ago. I mean,
yep.
This wasn't,
and that's why it's so easy for Trump to turn to activate that hatred, because that hatred was simmering underneath and has been built over hundreds of years of propaganda about Asian people. That's why all he had to do was give a couple of speeches, and you have a certain percentage of America that's going, I knew it, fucking Chinese.
They did it. It's the China virus. It started in Wuhan. So they must have created it. And it's like, that's the other thing too. Like you say, this racism has been there for so long. So even during the debates, no one in the debates, the vice president or presidential debates, Bernie was like, hey, wait a minute. Let's try to maybe reason with China, or they're not the big enemy. He got criticized wholeheartedly across the board. Because if you watch the presidential debates between Biden and Trump and Harris and Pence, the debate is not, hey, maybe we should reach out extend the hand of peace to China and work together. It's just China's bad, and how we're dealing with their badness is the only thing that's up for debate, which again, in my opinion, is rooted in this 150 years of racism.
Right. Well, yeah. And going against anybody who's not within our, capitalist the tentacles, the tentacles of our central banking system and everything. Yeah, no, there's no discussion, of the fact that in order to survive climate change, we're going to have to work. Nations are going to have to work together in order to survive environmental destruction that even unconnected to climate change. We're going to have to work together. None of that's discussed. None of that's talked about. It's just, the different ways we're going to fuck China and fight against China. Same with Russia, same with Iran. But I do have a good segue to what I'm covering here.
Government secret second segment segue from Lee Cap.
The segue is early American, basically workers versus capitalists versus the investor class. And it also, I'm going to start off with because kind of the center of the American myth, right, is it's about rugged individualism that also goes with capitalism. You fight for yourself, you don't work with others, and you achieve riches and wealth, and it's that's what they try and tell us is kind of the heart of America. And as if we've been that way since, day one. It was all this rugged individual. People came over here and they fought on their own and achieved. And going back to our earliest days, there are just so many examples of communalism, cooperation. Like that was the heart of it. in those early days. And in fact, that kind of view of things had to be like destroyed and destructed in order to allow for the kind of free market, destroy your neighbor because he's taking your wealth kind of attitude.
So if I understand correctly, you're saying in the early days of America, people were just pussies, right? Just helping each other out like a bunch of dumb hippies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It was early pussification of America. Yeah.
Well, thank God we got rid of that. That's what we need. Fighting with each other, stealing. Yeah. Sticking it to your neighbor. Now we're talking America.
Now we're talking.
Atta boy.
So this is coming from the book For All the People. This great historical analysis. It's all heavily sourced and everything. But so they start off with like Native American cooperation before the white settlers got here. And they say the hundreds of tribes and nations north of Mexico each had its own distinct culture, language, traditions, and history. Yet almost every account stresses community over individualism as their overriding core value, even among comparatively individualistic peoples. Culture patterns of economic cooperation were clearly ingrained in the fabric of every tribe. And so it's like the Native Americans needed to be crushed by our system and genocided, not just because we were taking all the land and they refused to be good slaves. They refused to be captured and made to work for us, but also because I think their system showed like that you could work in a cooperative unit, and it was incredibly, sustainable and good and just. And so I think that's yet another reason that it worked with our system to, get rid of the Native Americans. But he goes on to talk about how groups of extended families were organized into larger cooperative units, clans, and bands. The collection of these family groups, the concept of individual private property in land or natural resources was unknown. Tools were commonly shared within the communal group. It was unthinkable, for example, for one Inuit in a band to have two harpoons while another had none.
Wow, that's like, it's like, how are they going to have a good stock price if they do that? You know what I mean? They're not going to have much of a value to their investors.
Yeah, no, the stock's going to tank. Really, the whale blubber stock is going to go down big time.
What an insane concept to make sure that your fellow human has. If they don't have something and you have more than it, that you help. What a nutbag concept. It's like, oh man, like,
yeah.
It's almost seems like everything that like the white settlers did was horrific and ruined the planet.
In many ways, and in a second, I'm gonna also get to how many of the early settlements were also communal, but then were basically slowly taken over by the more individualistic, greedy, rich kind of oligarchs. But learning about the Native Americans in the before settler times, it also goes against that whole idea of human nature is to like hoard wealth. Like a lot of people think that like, oh, well, you couldn't have that because it's human nature to grab everything you can and like get more for yourself. And it's really not. That's a social engineering that we learn in our society. And I'm not just talking about the immensely greedy, but it's like in our day to day, we're taught, get a bunch of money so that you can be safe from the shit that goes down. It's like, because if you don't have that, who the fuck knows what's going to happen to you? You could end up homeless. You could end up without health care. Like,
right.
So we're really trained. That's ingrained in us. And it kind of the opposite was ingrained in, the native peoples then. Then he also gets into how, they had some level of democracy, collective democracy, formed part of almost every native social system north of Mexico. The Iroquois Confederacy developed intertribal democracy on a large scale. Their council of sachems, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, consisted of male elders from various tribes appointed by female elders and made decisions by unanimous collective consensus. So then he gets into the early colonial traditions, and this really blew my mind. I mean, I'd heard some of the communal stuff about native tribes, but I didn't really think about the fact that like the early settlers were largely communal as well, because it was almost impossible to survive without that in the early days. Close community survival cooperation permeated the entire way of life in colonial America. This was true of all the waves of settlers, British, French, and Spanish. Settlers raised houses and barns, plowed fields, and built fences cooperatively and collectively. And he goes into a long list of everything they did collectively. It served as social structures and gatherings that welded together the fabric of the working community of settlers in the same way that similar gatherings did among native peoples.
Well, all right. I mean, you can live that way if you want, but you're never going to have a Lamborghini.
It's so true. Or you'd like have the Lamborghini and then someone else could like use it and you'd be like, fuck you.
Yeah. Here's what I'm not hearing. No one was building a country club where only the wealthy could go.
Here, let me tell you what I'm not hearing. Okay.
I didn't hear anything. I didn't hear one thing in your little reading there about private jets. Not one, Lee. I don't get what you're telling me.
If it was communal, do you have any idea how many people would be in your hot tub? Gross. Okay.
It's weird. It's almost like you have to work together to survive. I wonder if that pertains to the environment and its complete collapse that we're enduring right now. Anyway, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead. You're talking about some nonsense a bunch of weirdos did a couple hundred years ago. Go ahead.
Don't interrupt with your garbage about the environment, all right?
Yeah. You're garbage. We're all in this together. Shut up. I'm going to get in my Lexus.
As one historian has commented, this power of the newly arrived pioneers to join together for common end without the intervention of governmental institutions was one of their marked characteristics. And, especially out in the kind of, what they call the wilderness or out in the Wild West and places like that, it's like there wasn't a lot of government structure. It was like people banded together and found ways largely to share and get through and share harvests and things without a government even saying that you have to give that to that person. It was like, it was assumed we got to work together or we're fucked. And he talks about barter. There was a lot of barter, but this is interesting. The incessant waves of displaced humanity found warmth and shelter on these troubled shores through cooperation, mutual aid, and sharing. Westward moving pioneers everywhere found group travel and group living normal. Cooperation, not competition, resounded as the dominant chord across the continent among the working population. And this is kind of incredible because it kind of upends what we're told, at least I was told in my history class as like the heart of the American venture was that, from day one, it was about rugged individualism. And this is kind of the polar opposite. And this is why I think this fits in government secrets is this isn't something the government's doing, or has done, but it's this history is kind of covered up because it completely teaches the opposite of what our system is now based on.
Yeah. And it really like what it shows, and it's really the theme of this podcast. I mean, literally for every episode, it comes down to this theme of the ruling elites that have been that have controlled this country. And you could argue they've been ruling elites for 1,000 years and they've always done kind of a lot of crap like this. But it shows you how sophisticated the propaganda is in this country. And I know, you've traveled around the world and you have friends and fans and stuff that live in other parts. And when you talk to people from other countries, they go, man, you Americans are so propagandized. And we're given two teams You can believe this bag of propaganda, the liberal blue MSNBC propaganda, or the conservative red Fox propaganda, or whatever, like you're allowed to, and then we'll introduce crazy things within those two spheres of QAnon or whatever, but it'll never point out the totalitarian structure of groupthink, which is that is deliberate, that was left. Now, I never read any of that. And again, I would argue I went to pretty decent public schools. My father was a college professor. My parents were college educated, but that was never, we were always taught, and you watch these shows, Little House on the Prairie or whatever, that you're just all alone out in the prairie, making it yourself. And that's revered in our culture. You just go it alone and go to the top of the mountain and I live off the land. And it's like, it's impossible to do. And this history shows us that it was impossible to do. So they can just change the narrative, which again, it's so sophisticated, our social programming in this country for this American exceptionalism crap, which allows people to be justified like, oh, it's okay, we're bombing Syria. Hey, we had to. The news said Iran backed. Like, that's not working together. We should be working with everybody. We should be working together to end war, to end homelessness. We could do all of these things. We could fix all of these things, but we're sold this nonsense, and it starts here. It starts like in the last segment. How are they able to so easily, both political parties and the media go, China's the bad guy? How are they so easily to do that? Because we just pointed out 150 years of institutional racism going back to the Chinese Excursion Act. Just like this working together is a bad idea. They've subliminally planted that in our brains through not telling us this. Because look what happens every time there's a disaster. What just happened in Texas, right? The community came together. The government was nowhere to be found. The community came together. Like, people from all different walks in Texas had to come together. People have had to do that just in this last year.
And imagine how much even better it would have gone if coming together was more taught and more ingrained in us. If we grew up with, more understanding of mutual aid groups and working together as a community, then there would have been even more. You're right. There's some amazing examples of the mutual aid that went on in Texas and went on in New Orleans after Katrina and things like that. But there's also, the point that, God, if we had a structure in place for these communities to help each other more regularly, it would have gone even better.
And also too, that thinking in these like tribal or indigenous communities, if you had someone in your tribe that didn't have a bow or was poor and didn't have a place to live, you failed as a leader. If you were the leader of that tribe, you were viewed as a failure. Your tribe was a failure. Your community had failed. You have somebody that's poor, that's not being fed. You leader failed. I failed. The whole community failed. Not in America. Oh, they should have pulled themselves up by the bootstraps.
Yeah, I one of the quotes that I skipped over was they were talking about the cooperative buffalo hunts. And yes, the warriors or the hunters that showed the most kind of prowess and skill and killed the buffalo, they might get more of the meat, of the reward, but ultimately no one went without. Like, nobody. They weren't going to allow someone to sit there and starve while he killed the buffalo, it's all his. Sorry, the warriors would feel guilt. The warriors would have failed. I mean, they would have viewed themselves as failures. And it's like, so I've been an American Red Cross disaster volunteer for almost 20 years. And I've seen, and in Southern California, there's always big disasters. So, and I was heavily involved in it from right after 9/11. And I've been to shelters, and I've seen when a big disaster happens and people have been evacuated and there's a shelter, the community comes out. It's unbelievable. The community shows up, and you see other agencies and mutual aid and churches and different faiths, and everyone's like, but then you always see a handful of opportunists, like these contractor guys
They're parasites. They listen on the scanners. So this one of the major things that Red Cross responds to is single family fires. And when you show up there, somebody's home has been burned to the ground. They've got nothing but the clothes on their back. And the Red Cross is called out by the fire department usually to like, hey, these people got nothing. They got nowhere to go. And the Red Cross shows up, gives them food, blah, 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 vouchers, housing, opens up a case file, whatever, all this stuff is in place. And then you see these contractors, these guys in trucks show up like vultures and they go, oh, we represent your insurance company. They're just trying to get the contract to rebuild the house that got burnt down.
Wow.
And they go to people deliberately who are like, I've lost everything. I got, and a lot of times it's like low income families who, had $1,000 under their mattress. Literally that was their savings account. Right. That's gone. And these guys show up and say, I represent your insurance company, and they're parasites. And like, I saw it firsthand. I saw these people like helping out their neighbors, complete strangers helping out, people just showing up with food, with whatever. The whole community comes out. And then you see these guys like, hey man, I got to make my money somehow. And it's like,
yeah. And on top of that, a great book to read about this is Scott Crow's, I think it's called Black Flags and Windmills, but he went down to New Orleans and helped create one of the most successful mutual aid, facilities or spots in New Orleans after Katrina. And not only is that story like not covered on mainstream media, you can't talk about that, citizens getting together and just helping each other without being a government agency. But a lot of the government agencies and the cops and even the military to some extent, although it sounds like the worst were the cops, were doing everything they could to try and shut it down, to stop it, to get in their way, to arrest some of them. And these are people that literally came from all over just to try and help people get food and water.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. It's insane. Like the government's like, and they got to keep a stranglehold on it. And you're just like, I mean, and this story, God, I like doing this show, but man, it makes me mad sometimes.
I think almost every show where you go, I like doing this show, but I don't fucking know. This fucking sucks.
It makes me so mad because it's like we had a system that was working. Everyone working together. It's real simple. We all work together.
Well, hold on. I haven't got to that yet.
Oh. All right, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's all right. I want to make you angrier. We're not quite at boiling point yet. Also to talk about like the communal land, like the idea of like everything could be bought up didn't exist for a lot of these early communities. Communal land grants he's talking about Spanish settlers in this part, typically kept about 90% of their land in common, including pastures and forests for collective use. The common land could not be sold. Beyond that, each family owned a house and a farmable plot, but the common land was self-governing and all males had a vote. Much work was done cooperatively. But so that's the Spanish settlers. 90% of the land was collective and couldn't be sold. And then he gets into how during the first 3 years in America, 1620 to 1623, the Pilgrims of Plymouth farmed and worked communally, depositing all the products of their work into a common warehouse and taking their needs from a common store. The first New England colony began as a commune and later reorganized into a cooperative community. And then I also found this. So this is what I was talking about the segue of workers versus the investor class. They weren't called capitalists back then, but that's basically what they were. But more than half, and I didn't know this. I knew all about. We learned all about the Mayflower, right, in school. But more than half of the 102 people aboard the Mayflower were indentured servants. Which meant they could work out of servitude over a number of years. But the day before landing, the servants staged an insurrection and declared they were seizing their freedom. The bulk of the Pilgrims, which were free workers, sided with the servants. The masters had no choice but to agree to the demands. All adult males signed the Mayflower Compact, affirming that all were now free and establishing a government in which all males held equal voice and vote. Thus, revolutionary servants set up the most democratic political system of its time in colonial America, although it still excluded women. Relations between the Pilgrim settlers and the investors quickly deteriorated, though. The colonists struggled through many hardships, expecting, and this is so interesting because this is fucking Amazon workers today or something. I mean, it's honestly like from our earliest days, these fights were going on. So the colonists had signed this contract that basically they were going to come here and they were going to ship back things like lumber and fur to enrich the investors who got them here. But it says the colonists struggled through hardships, expecting that the investors would send them regular supplies of food, clothes, and tools. Instead, all the following ships just came full only with new colonists, basically new workers. And the settlers were left to fend for themselves for survival while sending the returning ships back to England with furs, lumber, and saltfish to be sold by the investors. So the investors were fucking them from like day one. After 3 years in 1623, the conflict reached the breaking point. The Pilgrim governor unilaterally broke the contract and assigned individual plots. These varied in size depending on the size of each family. The families were given use of the land, but no inheritance rights. 2 years later, relations with the corporation had deteriorated even further. At that point, a group of Pilgrims terminated the agreement after buying out the investors, and Plymouth achieved self-government. So it's kind of incredible that, like, in our earliest days, it was the workers versus the investors. And he goes on to, I don't want to read too much, but he goes on to say that slowly the over the coming years, the oligarchy took over, a theocratic oligarchy took control of Plymouth. And, land was plentiful, but only at the price of the genocide of the Native Americans. They started putting in property rights and that you could buy and sell land for long term, and you could, it could be inherited by your children. So all of a sudden the land is getting, especially the good land, is getting bought up by wealthy investors. Literally, even in some of those earliest years, once they had land rights and you could buy them, investors started buying them just speculating, hoping they could sell it later for higher prices. So they were already like market forces were already destroying the communal system, the cooperative system, even pretty early on. And so you had a lot of farmers who couldn't afford land or whatever. They would get pushed farther and farther out into like the frontier and the wilderness. Small farmers commonly organized squatters associations to fight off the land speculators who were wreaking havoc in the rural communities. The discontented would end up in a community kind of banded together out in the wilderness. That was kind of like a hive of bees, a new spot deeper in the wilderness. Anyway, he does, but then he goes on to list so many like wonderful examples in America's early history of like communalism, of mutual aid, of working together. And most of this stuff we're either not told about, or we're not really told about it as if it's like a communal venture that's kind of the opposite of capitalism. He says, the Underground Railroad itself was one of the best known examples of a mutual aid organization. Obviously, it's just people helping others escape slavery they weren't looking to profit. It was just community. Benjamin Franklin, of course, created the first library, which was communal, books. And then he went on to help create the earliest cooperative firefighter company, right? These were all like and America takes like great pride in like at least we were told in school, in like public libraries and our firefighters. And it's like a lot of these things we take this immense amount of pride in a country are communal things, yes, but they're not described that way because then it would harm the propaganda.
Yeah. I mean, it's like they're communal, which is really what socialism is. So everyone's like, socialism is so evil. I'm always like, well, the fire department is socialist, and so is the police department and schools and roads and all that other stuff. And they're like,
military.
The military. Yeah, the military is socialist. It's like, and then you hear this description it's like, wow, this country really could have been amazing. But I mean, I keep waiting to hear, like, and back in the 1600s, that's when they formed the CIA, who started subjugating all of this. Like, I'm amazed the CIA, they didn't get that started till the World War II. I'm amazed there wasn't, like, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's the Freemasons, maybe they're the CIA.
Yeah, it was Illuminati, probably.
Probably Illuminati. But it's just like, and then people, like, when you talk about communal and everybody working together, then invariably there's already somebody like, well, if you just want to run around and make everything like Burning Man, that's your business, you know, like,
like making sure everyone housed equals Burning Man. That's
yeah, just naked body painting on mushrooms. Yeah, making sure everybody's housed, and it's we could do it right now. We could do it today in this country.
Yeah.
But we don't want to.
No, we don't. There are, by the way, I did a segment on Redacted Tonight recently. There are, especially during this pandemic, many groups across the country that are taking back homes for the homeless, basically houses that are technically owned by the bank or something, but there's no one in them. They're vacated homes. And, one of the big ones is in Philadelphia. They've taken back, reclaimed something like 30 houses, and they fight it in the courts when the bank tries to take them back. The Poor People's Army, I believe, is what they're called, with Sherry Honkala is doing a lot of it. And I mean, they're setting a pretty impressive example. Obviously, in Philadelphia, it's just 30 homes, but what it represents is pretty amazing. What it represents is people saying the fact that there's anybody in this incredibly rich country without a roof over their head is fucking ridiculous. And if this place is going to sit here empty, then people should be able to use it. People should be able to live in it. It shouldn't be that we just have individuals buying up an endless number of houses, endless number of property. You know, I think we've talked about before, Bill Gates and Ted Turner own like the size of a Delaware in this country. It's just ridiculous that the rich can buy all this up and obviously not use it, because it's impossible for one human being to use all of this shit that they buy. So absolutely, homeless people should be able to take vacated spaces.
And so how are they? That sounds great that they're doing that, and I hope they're doing this in more cities. Obviously, how are legally they're able to actually get the home away from the bank?
Well, they don't do it legally because our laws are bullshit. They just they go in or break in or whatever and begin living there. And then when the bank or the police or whatever come and try and kick them out, they go to the courts. And they've had some good wins recently, but it's an ongoing fight. And obviously, if you look at our quote unquote laws, then what they're doing is breaking the law. But guess what? Those laws were written by very powerful, rich people who wanted to be able to buy everything. So just because something is against the law does not mean that it's necessarily right or just or moral. So I challenge people to philosophically prove that a law should be that way. Don't just go, it's against the law. Like, let's talk about why that is. Why is it that someone should be sitting on the street in the middle of winter when there's a vacated house that literally no one's living in? Like,
yeah, it's in many cities now. It's against the law to feed the homeless. That is immoral. I don't care what the law says. It's immoral. Like the Chinese Excursion Act was the law. It was immoral. Like we could just, own slaves. That was the law. That was completely immoral.
Right.
Like, everything Hitler did was legal.
Exactly. So, this is bullshit about like, oh, it's illegal. I mean, Georgia just 2 weeks ago passed a bill saying you can't feed or give people water while they're standing in line to vote. Yeah, well, fuck you. Why don't we all go break the law and fucking bring pizza to people waiting in line to vote, and we'll be fucking criminals.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll be criminals. Yeah, I'm going to go feed people waiting to vote. You can arrest me if you want, but I'm
a fucking outlaw because I showed up with a power bar. Yep,
absolutely. And let's do that and get that going to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Good
episode, man. Good episode.
Great episode. Recap: Government Secrets, episode 34. Lock it down and put it in the book. Boop, boop, boop.
Put it in the communal books that we can all use whenever we want.
This is a communal episode of Government Secrets. Well, Lee Camp, this was fantastic. 591 people watching. Hit the like button, subscribe to both of our channels, and
it'll be many thousand by the time it's done.
Yes,
done with its run. So.
Yes, it will. Where can people watch and listen to all of your godless communal nonsense that you like to pour down people's throats?
All my criminal outlaw material is at leecamp.com. It's pretty much all free. Again, very godless to make it all free. My other podcast called Common Censored. I have a podcast that's all of my material from Redacted Tonight and other stuff as well. And that's called Moment of Clarity. So if you haven't checked out Moment of Clarity, check out that podcast. And it's all at leecamp.com. I'm on Rockfin and YouTube as well. So check that out.
Right on, folks. Well, you can, if you're watching this on either one of our channels, make sure you subscribe to the other guy's channel. And then if you're listening to this on iTunes, Government Secrets or whatever, 5-star reviews, positive comments, sharing it, all that stuff helps. All those analytics help. Because I don't know, maybe when things open up and we're back on the road, maybe there's a couple of live Government Secrets. I don't know, buddy.
I could see it happening.
It'll be a lot of fun. So all my stuff's at GrahamElwood.com. You can watch my show, Political Vigilante.
We'd go on a Nissan Leaf tour of the country.
Yes, the Leaf Tour, Nissan Leaf Tour. Charging across America, except where it's outlawed.
Charging across America, looking for the next charging station.
That's the name of the tour. Looking for the next charging station. Is there a charging station outside of your venue? Well, then we're going to do a show there. If there is, I don't know what to say. And yeah, you can watch Political Vigilante on YouTube and also rockfin.com/Graham Elwood, which is a blockchain cryptocurrency platform. Lee is on there. It's the future. I've still been demonetized by YouTube, which is bullshit. Also, my Political Vigilante merch is now available. It's on demand. So just go to GrahamElwood.com. You can get the PV logo. You can get Make Gotham Great Again on a myriad of products. So support what I'm doing there. And I think that's it. Right?
All right, man. Yeah, that's it. Keep fighting, and I'll see you next week.
You got it, buddy.